At the bustling international airport, Sarah Thompson was just another name in the crowd of workers who kept the machines of modern travel running smoothly. She wasn't glamorous or flashy, just a hard-working mechanic with grease-stained hands, and a knack for solving problems others couldn't. Her days were filled with diagnosing engine troubles, replacing faulty parts, and ensuring that planes took off safely without delay. To most people, she blended into the background, but to those who knew her work, Sarah was indispensable. It was late afternoon when Sarah's phone buzzed loudly against the metal toolbox beside her. The message came through in all caps. Urgent. Private jet stranded on tarmac needs immediate repair. She sighed, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand as sweat dripped down her face. It had already been a long day, and she'd hoped to clock out early for once. But this was the life of an aircraft mechanic. You didn't get to choose your hours. If a plane needed fixing, you fixed it. Sarah grabbed her gear and headed toward the tarmac where the private jet sat motionless. As she approached, she noticed the sleek design of the aircraft, a custom-built model worth millions, if not billions. This wasn't some commercial airliner. This was the kind of plane only a few select individuals could afford. A small group of people stood nearby, looking anxious and frustrated. Among them was a tall man in a tailored suit pacing back and forth, glancing at his watch every few seconds. His expression said everything. This wasn't just any passenger. This was someone important. The captain of the jet intercepted Sarah before she could reach the aircraft. He explained the situation. Quickly, the plane had experienced a sudden loss of hydraulic pressure during pre-flight checks. Without resolving the issue, they couldn't take off. And time was critical because whoever owned this jet clearly had somewhere important to be. The captain seemed relieved to see Sarah arrive, knowing her reputation for tackling tough repairs under tight deadlines. As Sarah climbed aboard the jet to inspect the problem, she felt the eyes of everyone on her. Normally, she worked behind the scenes, unnoticed by passengers or owners. Today, however, there was no escaping the spotlight. She pushed aside her discomfort and focused on the task at hand. Opening the access panel to the hydraulic system, she immediately spotted signs of trouble. Burnt wiring and corrosion caused by poor maintenance after a recent upgrade. It was a rookie mistake, one that shouldn't have happened on a plane like this. While Sarah worked methodically to trace the source of the issue, the man in the suit continued pacing outside. Every now and then, he would glance up at the plane, his frustration growing more visible. Sarah recognized him from photos she'd seen online. It was Alexander Drake, one of the richest men in the world. Known for building a tech empire practically overnight, he was a household name. Yet here he was, stuck on a tarmac because of a mechanical failure. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to imagine how infuriating that must feel, to have unlimited resources at your disposal, yet still be powerless against something as simple as a broken part. Despite the mounting tension around her, Sarah stayed calm. She had faced worse situations before and always managed to come out on top. Her fingers moved swiftly over the damaged components, testing connections and swapping out wires. Within minutes, she located the root cause of the problem, a tiny sensor malfunctioning due to overheating. Replacing it required precision and care, but Sarah handled it with ease. As she tightened the final bolt and closed the access panel, she gave the system one last check to ensure everything was functioning properly. When the engines roared back to life, signaling that the repair was successful, a collective sigh of relief swept through the group waiting below. Sarah stepped off the plane, removing her gloves as she descended the stairs. That's when Alexander Drake walked over to her, his earlier frustration replaced by curiosity, and perhaps even admiration. Up close, he looked younger than his pictures suggested, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. He extended his hand and introduced himself, though Sarah already knew exactly who he was. "Thank you," Alexander said, his voice steady but warm. "I don't think I've ever met someone quite like you." Sarah shook his hand firmly, trying not to let her nerves show. "Just doing my job," she replied with a shrug, attempting to downplay the significance of what she'd just accomplished. But Alexander didn't seem satisfied with brushing it off so casually. He lingered for a moment longer, studying her, face as if searching for something. There was an intensity in his gaze that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. Before she could fully process what was happening, he added, "You're extraordinary. Most people wouldn't have been able to fix that so quickly." Sarah chuckled nervously, unsure how to respond. Extraordinary wasn't a word anyone had ever used to describe her. Hardworking, sure, reliable, absolutely, but extraordinary, that was new territory. Still, something about the way Alexander spoke, the sincerity in his tone, made her believe he meant every word. As the crew prepared the jet for departure, Alexander hesitated, glancing between the plane and Sarah. Finally, he turned back to her and said, "This isn't over. I'll make sure of that." Then, with a nod, he boarded the aircraft and disappeared inside. For a moment, Sarah stood frozen on the tarmac, watching as the jet taxied down the runway and lifted gracefully into the sky. What did he mean by, "This isn't over"? Was he simply referring to thanking her later? Or was there something else brewing beneath the surface? Whatever it was, one thing was certain. This chance encounter had left an impression on both of them, one that neither would soon forget. The next morning, Sarah woke up with the memory of the previous day still vivid in her mind. She replayed the scene over and over again. The sleek jet, the frantic crew, and most of all, Alexander Drake's piercing gaze as he shook her hand. It wasn't every day that someone like him took notice of someone like her. Mechanics weren't usually the center of attention, especially not billionaires. Still, she tried to brush it off as just another odd moment in her unpredictable job. People like Alexander probably met hundreds of people daily. There was no reason to think he'd remember her beyond a passing "thank you." But life had other plans. As Sarah sipped her coffee and scrolled through her phone while getting ready for work, a knock at her apartment door interrupted her routine. Confused, she wasn't expecting anyone. She opened it cautiously. On her doorstep stood a delivery man holding a small envelope. He handed it to her with a polite smile before leaving. Curious, Sarah closed the door and examined the envelope. It was plain white, but her name was written on the front in elegant handwriting. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it and pulled out a card inside. The note was brief but unmistakably personal. "Dear Sarah, thank you for your incredible skill and professionalism yesterday. I would love to express my gratitude further by inviting you to dinner tonight at 8 p.m. Please let me know if you're available. Sincerely, Alexander Drake." Sarah stared at the note, rereading it several times to make sure she wasn't imagining things. Dinner? With Alexander Drake? The billionaire who owned private jets and tech companies worth billions? This had to be some kind of prank, or maybe a mix-up. Surely someone like him didn't actually want to spend time with someone like her. Yet the note felt genuine, and the handwriting matched what she'd seen when he signed autographs during public appearances. Her first instinct was to laugh it off and toss the invitation aside. What could they possibly have in common? But then, doubt crept in. Maybe this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, an experience she might regret turning down later. After all, how often did someone get invited to dine with one of the wealthiest men in the world? Plus, there was something intriguing about the way he'd looked at her on the tarmac. There was no arrogance in his tone, only sincerity. Perhaps he really did want to thank her properly. Sarah spent the rest of the day torn between excitement and hesitation. At work, her colleagues noticed she seemed distracted. When she finally confided in her best friend and coworker, Mia, the reaction was predictable. "Are you kidding me?" Mia exclaimed, nearly dropping her wrench in shock. "You have to go. This is insane. Do you know how many people dream of even meeting Alexander Drake, let alone having dinner with him?" "I don't know," Sarah replied uncertainly. "It feels weird. Like, why would he care about thanking me so much? I mean, I fixed his plane. It's literally my job." Mia rolled her eyes playfully. "Girl, you saved his day. Maybe he saw something in you that impressed him. Besides, what do you have to lose? Worst case scenario, you eat free food and come home with a funny story." After hours of deliberation and a little more encouragement from Mia, Sarah decided to accept the invitation. She texted Alexander, using the number provided on the note, and confirmed she'd meet him at the restaurant. As soon as she hit send, nerves bubbled up inside her. What should she wear? How formal should she act? Would she embarrass herself in front of one of the most powerful men in the world? That evening, after spending far too long picking out an outfit, Sarah arrived at the upscale restaurant Alexander had mentioned. It was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, a dimly lit space with crystal chandeliers, plush velvet chairs, and waitstaff dressed in black tie. For a moment she wondered if she'd walked into the wrong place. Then she spotted him. Alexander stood near the entrance looking just as polished as he had on the tarmac, but this time, without the stress. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, and his presence commanded attention. When he saw Sarah approach, his face lit up with a warm smile that made her feel instantly at ease. "You came," he said, stepping forward to greet her. His voice carried a hint of surprise, as though he hadn't been entirely sure she'd show up. "Yeah, well," Sarah shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant despite her racing heart. "Free dinner sounded good." Alexander laughed softly, ushering her toward their table. "I'm glad you accepted. I wasn't sure if you'd think I was crazy for reaching out." They settled into their seats and Sarah found herself relaxing bit by bit. Despite his wealth and fame, Alexander didn't behave like the entitled billionaire she'd imagined. Instead, he was attentive and genuine, asking questions about her life and listening intently to her answers. He wanted to know everything: how she became a mechanic, what challenges she faced in her career, and even what inspired her to pursue such a hands-on profession. In turn, Sarah learned more about him. Beneath the glitz and glamour of his public persona lay a man deeply passionate about innovation and problem-solving. He spoke animatedly about his journey building his company from scratch, admitting that success hadn't come easily. There were failures along the way, moments where he doubted himself, but he persevered because he believed in his vision. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, covering topics ranging from technology to travel to childhood memories. By dessert, Sarah realized she'd forgotten to feel intimidated. Instead, she felt comfortable, almost as if they were old friends catching up after years apart. And yet, there was an undeniable spark between them, a connection neither could ignore. As the evening drew to a close, Alexander suggested taking a walk outside. The cool night air was refreshing after hours indoors, and the quiet streets gave them space to reflect on the evening. They strolled side by side, occasionally brushing shoulders as they talked. Eventually, they stopped beneath a street lamp, its golden glow casting soft shadows around them. "I meant what I said earlier," Alexander began, breaking the comfortable silence. "You're extraordinary, Sarah, not just because of what you did yesterday, but because of who you are. I haven't met anyone like you in a very long time." Sarah felt her cheeks flush, unsure how to respond. Compliments weren't something she received often, especially not from someone like him. "Thanks," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm just doing my job." "No," Alexander countered gently. "You're doing more than that. You're making a difference, and I'd like to get to know you better, if you'll let me." For the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly seen, not as a mechanic or a worker, but as a person with dreams, talents, and potential. As they stood there under the stars, she realized this wasn't just about gratitude or curiosity anymore. Something deeper was unfolding, something neither of them could deny. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Alexander's lives began to intertwine in ways neither of them had anticipated. What started as a simple dinner invitation turned into regular meetings, coffee dates, walks through the park, and even impromptu visits to places that held meaning for each of them. For Sarah, these moments were surreal. She found herself stepping into a world she'd only seen from afar, a realm of luxury cars, private jets, and exclusive events. Yet despite the extravagance surrounding him, Alexander made an effort to keep things grounded. He didn't bombard her with expensive gifts or flashy gestures. Instead, he focused on building a genuine connection. One evening, after a long day at work, Sarah met Alexander at a quiet cafe near the airport. They sat by the window, watching planes take off and land in the distance. It was a fitting backdrop for their growing relationship. Planes symbolized movement, change, and new beginnings, much like what Sarah was experiencing in her own life. As they sipped their drinks, Alexander leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You?" "No," he said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "I've been thinking about something." Sarah raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh? What's that?" "I've spent years chasing success, building my company, trying to prove myself to the world," he continued. "But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really matters. Meeting you reminded me of that." Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly, his gaze steady. "You're real, Sarah. You don't pretend to be anything you're not. You don't care about titles or money. You just are who you are. And honestly, it's refreshing. Inspiring, even." His words sent a warm flush through her cheeks. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not with such raw honesty and admiration. Still, Sarah couldn't help but feel a pang of unease. Their worlds were so different. Could someone like her really fit into his life? Wouldn't people judge her, or worse, assume she was only interested in his wealth? Before she could dwell too much on those thoughts, Alexander surprised her again. "Come with me this weekend," he said suddenly. "There's something I want to show you." "Where are we going?" she asked, curious. "It's a surprise," he replied with a playful grin. "Trust me, it'll be fun." Though hesitant at first, Sarah agreed. She trusted Alexander, and part of her was excited to see where this journey would lead. Little did she know, the weekend would become one of the most memorable experiences of her life. The following Saturday morning, Sarah arrived at the address Alexander had given her, a private hangar at the airport. When she stepped inside, her jaw dropped. Waiting for her was a sleek, state-of-the-art jet emblazoned with the logo of Alexander's company. Beside it stood Alexander himself, dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, looking every bit like the adventurous entrepreneur she'd come to admire. "What is all this?" Sarah asked, gesturing toward the plane. "This," Alexander said proudly, "is my way of showing you how grateful I am for everything you've done. For fixing my jet, yes, but also for reminding me what truly matters. Today we're taking a little trip, just you and me." Sarah laughed nervously. "You're serious? We're flying somewhere?" "Absolutely," he replied. "Pack your bags. We're heading to the coast." As they boarded the jet together, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the opulence around her. Plush leather seats, mahogany finishes, and a fully stocked bar greeted her as she settled in. Despite the luxury, Alexander kept things light, cracking jokes and pointing out landmarks as they soared above the clouds. By the time they landed at their destination, a picturesque seaside town known for its pristine beaches and charming streets, Sarah felt more relaxed than she had in years. They spent the weekend exploring the area, indulging in local cuisine, and soaking in the beauty of the ocean. During one particularly memorable moment, they rented a small boat and ventured out onto the water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink when Alexander turned to Sarah with a mischievous glint in his eye. "Ever driven a boat before?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "Can't say I have." "Well," he said, tossing her the keys, "there's a first time for everything." With Alexander guiding her, Sarah took control of the wheel, navigating the waves with surprising ease. Laughter bubbled up between them as they sped across the water, the salty breeze tangling their hair. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt untouchable, free from the weight of expectations and limitations. In that moment, surrounded by beauty and laughter, she realized how much Alexander had changed her perspective. He wasn't just introducing her to a new world. He was helping her rediscover parts of herself she'd forgotten. Back home, however, reality began to creep in. While Sarah cherished the time she spent with Alexander, she couldn't ignore the whispers and stares whenever they went out together. People recognized him instantly, snapping photos or approaching him for autographs. Some were polite, but others weren't shy about voicing their skepticism about their relationship. "She's just using him," Sarah overheard one woman whisper. During a charity gala Alexander had invited her to attend. "Guys like him always end up with gold diggers." Though Alexander reassured her that such comments didn't matter, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy. Who was she compared to him? A mechanic from a working-class family with no connections or status. Meanwhile, Alexander moved effortlessly through high society, shaking hands and making deals worth millions. Was it possible for two people from such vastly different backgrounds to truly understand each other? Despite her doubts, Alexander remained steadfast. He introduced her to friends and colleagues, treating her with the same respect and affection he showed in private. Slowly but surely, Sarah began to see glimpses of hope. Not everyone judged her harshly. Some admired her authenticity and work ethic. Even Alexander's closest confidants warmed up to her, impressed by her intelligence and humility. One afternoon, while tinkering with an old car in her driveway, a hobby she'd picked up from her late father, Alexander joined her unexpectedly. He rolled up his sleeves without hesitation and grabbed a wrench, eager to learn. At first, Sarah teased him about being clueless, but soon they were laughing and joking as grease smeared across their hands. "You're good at this," Alexander admitted, wiping his brow. "I never thought fixing engines could be so satisfying." "That's because you've never had to depend on it," Sarah replied with a smile. "Sometimes it's not about the money, it's about knowing you can fix something yourself." Her words lingered in the air, resonating deeply with Alexander. Over the past few weeks, he'd come to appreciate the simplicity and honesty of Sarah's lifestyle. Unlike the polished facades he encountered daily in his professional world, she offered something rare: authenticity. With her, he didn't have to pretend or perform. He could simply be himself. As they worked side by side under the hood of the car, Alexander realized something profound. Love wasn't about finding someone who matched your wealth or status. It was about finding someone who challenged you, inspired you, and made you want to be better. And in Sarah, he had found exactly that. By the time they finished repairing the car, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. Standing there, covered in dirt and sweat, Alexander felt a surge of clarity. He knew what he wanted: to spend the rest of his life with Sarah. But convincing her wouldn't be easy. First, he needed to prove that their differences didn't define them. Together, they could build a future that blended both their worlds, one built on trust, respect, and love. And so, as they cleaned up and headed inside, Alexander resolved to make his intentions clear. Whatever obstacles lay ahead, he was ready to face them, as long as Sarah was by his side. As weeks turned into months, Sarah and Alexander's bond grew stronger despite the challenges they faced. Their relationship wasn't without its hurdles. There were moments of doubt, misunderstandings, and outside pressures, but neither of them was willing to give up. They had come too far to let anything stand in their way. Slowly but surely, they began to find a rhythm that worked for both of them, blending their vastly different worlds into something unique and meaningful. One evening, after returning from another glamorous event hosted by one of Alexander's business associates, Sarah found herself sitting on her couch, staring at her grease-stained hands. She had spent most of the day mingling with people who lived lives she couldn't even imagine. People who flew private jets as casually as others took taxis, who wore designer clothes like uniforms, and who tossed around numbers that made her head spin. Despite Alexander's efforts to make her feel included, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. "Why does this bother me so much?" she muttered to herself, rubbing her temples. "I'm not like them. I never will be." Her thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Alexander. "Are you okay? You seemed quiet tonight." Sarah hesitated before replying. How could she explain what she was feeling without sounding ungrateful or insecure? Finally, she typed out a simple response. "Just tired. Long day." Within minutes, there was a knock at her door. Surprised, she opened it to find Alexander standing there, still dressed in his tailored suit, but looking more relaxed than he had earlier. He held 2 cups of coffee in his hands, one black just how she liked it, and offered her a sheepish smile. "I figured you might need this," he said, stepping inside. "And maybe some company." Sarah couldn't help but smile back, touched by his thoughtfulness. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," he replied, handing her the coffee. "Besides, I think we both know you weren't just tired tonight." She sighed, sinking onto the couch. "Am I that obvious?" Alexander joined her, setting his cup aside. "Only to someone who cares about you." "What's going on, Sarah?" For a moment, she debated brushing him off with another vague excuse. But then she remembered all the times he'd been honest with her. The late-night conversations where he shared his fears, his dreams, his vulnerabilities. If anyone deserved her honesty, it was him. "It's everything," she admitted finally. "Your world. It's so different from mine. Sometimes I feel like I don't fit in. Like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." Alexander listened intently, his expression softening. "You're not pretending, Sarah. You're exactly who you are, and that's why I admire you. You don't try to impress anyone or chase approval. You're real." "But your friends, they don't see me that way," she countered. "They look at me like I'm some kind of charity case. Or worse, they think I'm using you." He reached out, placing a gentle hand over hers. "Let me tell you something about my so-called friends. Most of them only care about what I can do for them. They don't understand loyalty or authenticity because they've never experienced it. But I do. And I see those qualities in you every single day." His words brought tears to her eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. "It's not just about them, though. It's about us. We're so different, Alexander. Our lives, our backgrounds. It's like we're from two completely separate planets." "That's true," he acknowledged. "But isn't that what makes us work? You bring balance to my life, Sarah. You remind me of what's important. Without you, I'd probably still be chasing empty goals, trying to prove myself to people who don't matter." Sarah looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. All she saw was sincerity. Still, she couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of her mind, the one that whispered about all the ways things could go wrong. What if they drifted apart? What if his world swallowed her whole until she lost herself entirely? Sensing her hesitation, Alexander leaned closer, his voice steady but tender. "I'm not asking you to change, Sarah. I love you for who you are. And if anyone has a problem with that, then they can deal with me." The word love hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah's heart raced as she processed what he'd just said. Had he really meant it? Or was it just an impulsive statement born out of the moment? "You love me?" she asked softly, almost afraid to believe it. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "I do. More than I ever thought possible. You've changed my life in ways I didn't think were possible, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks now, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully embrace the truth. Alexander wasn't just infatuated with her. He genuinely cared about her. And despite their differences, they shared something rare and beautiful, a connection built on trust, respect, and mutual admiration. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Alexander continued navigating the complexities of their relationship. While the outside world still posed challenges, they focused on strengthening their bond. Alexander introduced Sarah to activities that blended their interests: cooking classes, outdoor adventures, and even volunteer projects where they could give back to the community together. In turn, Sarah taught him practical skills like fixing cars and understanding the value of hard work. Together, they created a dynamic that celebrated both their strengths and their differences. One weekend, Alexander invited Sarah to join him on a trip to his family estate, a sprawling property nestled in the countryside. It was a place he rarely visited, preferring the hustle and bustle of city life. But for Sarah, it was a chance to experience a side of him she hadn't seen before. As they strolled through the gardens and explored the historic mansion, Alexander opened up about his childhood, the loneliness of growing up wealthy, the pressure to succeed and the absence of genuine connections. I used to hate coming here as a kid, he confessed, gazing out at the rolling hills. It felt like a prison sometimes. But being here with you, it feels different. Peaceful. Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand. Maybe it's because you're not alone this time. Her words struck a chord deep within him. For years, Alexander had carried the weight of his success alone, believing that vulnerability was a weakness. But with Sarah, he didn't have to pretend anymore. He could be himself, flaws and all, and know that she would accept him. Later that evening, as they sat by the fireplace sipping wine, Alexander turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "There's something I need to ask you," he said, his tone unusually solemn. Sarah's stomach flipped nervously. "Okay." He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "This past year with you has been the happiest of my life. You've shown me what it means to truly live, to laugh, to dream, to love. And I don't want to lose that, ever. So, will you move in with me?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She hadn't expected such a big step so soon. But as she looked into Alexander's hopeful eyes, she realized she didn't need time to think. She already knew her answer. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Of course." Relief and joy washed over Alexander's face as he pulled her into a tight embrace. For the first time, they both felt certain about their future. Together. As they prepared to leave the estate the following morning, Sarah stood outside, taking in the breathtaking view one last time. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the landscape. Beside her, Alexander wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "The future," she replied, leaning into him. "Our future." Alexander smiled, kissing the top of her head. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." And for the first time in her life, Sarah believed it. The months that followed Sarah and Alexander's decision to move in together were a whirlwind of adjustments, compromises, and unforgettable moments. Their new home, a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city skyline, was a far cry from Sarah's modest apartment or even Alexander's sleek but impersonal bachelor pad. It was a space they designed together, blending elements of both their personalities, modern elegance mixed with cozy warmth. For Sarah, it symbolized the merging of their worlds, a place where they could truly be themselves while building a life side by side. At first, living together came with its share of challenges. Sarah wasn't used to having staff around the house, let alone someone cooking meals for her or cleaning up after her. She insisted on doing her own laundry, and occasionally joined the chef in the kitchen, eager to prove she could still take care of herself. Meanwhile, Alexander had to adapt to Sarah's laid-back approach to life. He was accustomed to precision and schedules, but Sarah thrived on spontaneity, like suggesting a midnight drive just because the stars looked particularly bright. These differences sometimes led to humorous clashes, but more often than not, they complemented each other, creating a balance neither had experienced before. Despite the occasional hiccups, their bond only grew stronger. They spent weekends exploring hidden gems in the city, local markets, art galleries, and hole-in-the-wall restaurants Sarah loved introducing him to. On quieter days, they curled up on the couch watching old movies or worked on puzzles sprawled across the dining table. To anyone observing them, it was clear they weren't just partners. They were best friends who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. But as much as they cherished their private moments, the public eye remained an unavoidable part of Alexander's life. And now, Sarah's too. Paparazzi followed them everywhere, capturing every detail of their relationship for tabloids hungry for headlines. At first, Sarah found it overwhelming. She hated the constant scrutiny, the invasive questions about whether she was good enough for Alexander. Even worse were the rumors, some ridiculous, others cutting, that painted her as a gold digger or accused Alexander of losing touch with reality. One particularly grueling day, after attending a high-profile charity gala, Sarah retreated to the car in tears. A reporter had cornered her outside the venue, firing off intrusive questions about her intentions toward Alexander. Though she tried to brush it off, the words stung. Back at the penthouse, Alexander found her sitting on the balcony staring out at the city lights. "What happened?" he asked gently, sitting beside her. She hesitated, wiping away stray tears. "It's stupid," she muttered. "I shouldn't let it bother me." "Hey," he said firmly, tilting her chin so she'd meet his gaze. "Nothing you feel is stupid. Tell me." Reluctantly, Sarah recounted the encounter, the harsh comments, the judgmental stares. "They don't think I belong here, Alexander. Maybe they're right." "No," he interrupted sharply, his voice filled with conviction. "They're wrong. You belong wherever you choose to be, including right here, with me. Don't let them make you doubt yourself, Sarah. You've earned your place in my life, not because of what you do, but because of who you are." His words brought fresh tears to her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude. Alexander had always been her rock, defending her against critics and reminding her of her worth. With his support, she began to develop thicker skin, learning to tune out the noise and focus on what mattered most: their love. As the year drew to a close, Alexander decided to host a lavish New Year's Eve party aboard his private yacht. And so, annual tradition among his elite circle of friends and colleagues. While Sarah initially balked at the idea, Alexander assured her it would be different this time. Instead of formal speeches and networking, he planned a celebration focused on fun and connection, and for the first time, he wanted to share this milestone with the woman who had changed his life. On the night of the event, Sarah stepped onto the deck wearing a shimmering silver gown Alexander had surprised her with weeks earlier. The dress hugged her curves perfectly, and though it felt extravagant compared to her usual style, she couldn't deny how confident it made her feel. As guests mingled around them, sipping champagne and admiring the glittering ocean views, Alexander stayed by her side, introducing her to everyone as the most important person in my life. Though she appreciated his efforts, Sarah couldn't help feeling self-conscious under the weight of so many curious stares. Some attendees whispered behind their hands, speculating about her background or questioning why Alexander, a man known for his calculated decisions, had chosen someone so unconventional. Others, however, went out of their way to welcome her, complimenting her charm and intelligence. By the end of the evening, Sarah realized something surprising. She didn't need to impress anyone. Those who mattered already saw her value. Midnight approached and the countdown began. Fireworks erupted over the horizon, painting the sky in bursts of color. Couples kissed. Laughter filled the air, and Sarah leaned into Alexander's embrace, feeling utterly content. But just as the clock struck 12, Alexander pulled away slightly, his expression unusually serious. "There's one more thing I want to do tonight," he said softly, reaching into his pocket. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as he dropped to one knee, holding up a small velvet box. Inside was a dazzling diamond ring, its brilliance catching the light of the fireworks above. "Sarah Thompson," he began, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "From the moment you fixed my jet, you've been fixing pieces of me I didn't even know were broken. You've taught me how to live again, to laugh, to dream, to love without fear. I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Gasps rippled through the crowd as all eyes turned to Sarah, waiting for her response. Her mind raced, overwhelmed by the enormity of the moment. This was it, the culmination of everything they'd built together. Every challenge, every triumph, every quiet moment of connection had led them here. "Yes," she whispered finally, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, pulling her into a kiss that drew cheers and applause from their guests. As they embraced, surrounded by the beauty of the night and the love of those closest to them, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. Whatever obstacles lay ahead, she knew they could face them together. In the days that followed, news of their engagement spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed with congratulatory messages, magazine covers featured photos of the happy couple, and well-wishers flooded them with gifts and good wishes. Amid the chaos, Sarah and Alexander retreated to the countryside estate where they'd first solidified their commitment to each other. Sitting by the fireplace wrapped in blankets and sharing stories, they dreamed about their future, the wedding, the places they'd travel, the family they hoped to build. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," Alexander admitted one evening, gazing into the flames. "You've given me a second chance at happiness, and you've given me a whole new world," Sarah replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "But no matter where we go or what happens, I know one thing for sure. We'll always have each other." As they sat there hand in hand, Sarah realized something profound. Love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone who made imperfection beautiful. Together, they had created something extraordinary, a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and an unshakable belief in each other. And, as they prepared to embark on this next chapter of their lives, Sarah knew one thing for certain: their story was just beginning. The months leading up to Sarah and Alexander's wedding were a whirlwind of excitement, planning, and occasional chaos. They wanted their special day to reflect who they were as individuals and as a couple, a blend of elegance and simplicity, luxury and warmth. To achieve this, they worked closely with a team of planners, designers, and chefs, ensuring every detail was perfect without losing sight of what truly mattered: celebrating their love. Sarah took charge of many aspects of the planning, determined to infuse the event with personal touches that represented her journey with Alexander. She chose a color palette of soft golds and deep blues, inspired by the first evening they spent together under the stars. For the ceremony, she picked a venue, unlike any other, an open-air garden surrounded by towering trees and fragrant flowers. It was serene yet breathtaking, much like the relationship they had built over time. Alexander, on the other hand, focused on making sure everyone felt welcome and cared for. He insisted on including a mix of guests from both their worlds: Sarah's close-knit group of friends and family alongside his business associates and high-profile acquaintances. Though some of his peers initially raised eyebrows at the idea of mingling with mechanics and factory workers, Alexander brushed off their skepticism. "These are the people who matter most to us," he told Sarah firmly. "Anyone who has a problem with that isn't worth our time." As the big day approached, nerves began to creep in for both of them. Sarah worried about how seamlessly their two worlds would merge during such an intimate occasion. Would her parents feel out of place among Alexander's billionaire friends? Would his colleagues judge her choices or question whether she belonged in his life? Meanwhile, Alexander fretted over giving a speech that would do justice to the depth of his feelings for Sarah. Public speaking came naturally to him in boardrooms, but expressing emotions in front of hundreds of people was entirely different. The morning of the wedding, Sarah woke up early, staring out the window of the cozy cottage where she'd spent the night with her mother and best friend Mia. The sky was clear, bathed in the golden light of dawn. Despite the butterflies fluttering, in her stomach she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Today wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about committing herself to the man who had changed her life forever. Mia helped Sarah into her dress, a flowing ivory gown adorned with delicate lace patterns that hugged her figure before cascading into a graceful train. Her hair was styled in loose waves, framing her face perfectly, while a simple diamond necklace Alexander had gifted her rested elegantly around her neck. When Mia handed her the bouquet, a mix of white roses and baby's breath, Sarah couldn't help but smile through tears. "You look stunning," Mia said, hugging her tightly. "He's going to lose his mind when he sees you." At the same time, Alexander paced nervously in his suite, adjusting his tie for the 100th time. His best man, a childhood friend named Ethan, tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but Alexander barely heard them. All he could think about was Sarah, the way she laughed, the way she challenged him, the way she made him believe in second chances. As he stood overlooking the garden where they would soon exchange vows, he whispered to himself, "Don't mess this up." When the ceremony began, The air buzzed with anticipation. Guests filed into their seats, marveling at the beauty of the surroundings. Strings of fairy lights twinkled overhead, and petals lined the aisle leading to a flower-laden archway where the officiant waited. As the music swelled, all eyes turned to Sarah, who appeared at the entrance, escorted by her father. She looked radiant, glowing with happiness as she walked toward Alexander, who stood frozen in awe. For a moment, everything else faded away. The crowd disappeared, the cameras ceased to exist. All that remained was the two of them, locked in each other's gaze. When Sarah reached the altar, her father placed her hand in Alexander's, nodding approvingly. The ceremony itself was short but deeply meaningful, filled with heartfelt promises and laughter shared between the couple. At one point, Alexander choked up while reciting his vows, earning murmurs of admiration from the audience. "I promise to always see you, not just who you are today, but who you're becoming," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I promise to stand by your side no matter where life takes us." Sarah's response was equally moving. "You've shown me what it means to love without limits, to dream bigger than I ever thought possible, and to believe in myself even when I doubted. I promise to be your partner, your cheerleader, and your home." By the time they exchanged rings and sealed their vows with a kiss, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Cheers erupted as they walked back down the aisle together, officially husband and wife. The reception that followed was nothing short of magical. Held in a grand ballroom decorated with lush greenery and twinkling chandeliers, the celebration brought together elements of both their personalities. Long tables laden with gourmet dishes sat alongside buffet stations offering comfort, food Sarah loved like macaroni and cheese and sliders. A live band played a mix of classic hits and modern favorites, keeping the dance floor packed throughout the night. One of the highlights of the evening was Alexander's speech. Standing at the microphone, he addressed the crowd with a mixture of humor and sincerity. "When I first met Sarah, I thought she was extraordinary because she fixed my jet," he began, drawing laughter from the audience. "But as I got to know her, I realized she's extraordinary because of who she is, because she taught me how to live again, how to find joy in the little things, and how to love unconditionally." He paused, turning to Sarah, who sat at their table wiping away tears. "Thank you for saying yes, for believing in us, and for showing me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in moments like these." Sarah's own speech was equally heartfelt, thanking her family, friends, and Alexander for supporting her journey. "I never imagined I'd end up here," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I'm so grateful I did, because now I have a partner who makes me better, stronger, and happier than I ever thought possible." As the night wore on, the festivities grew more lively. Sarah surprised everyone, including herself, by taking to the dance floor with abandon, spinning and laughing as Alexander twirled her around. Even the most reserved guests couldn't resist joining in, creating a scene of pure joy and connection. Later that evening, as the clock ticked past midnight, Sarah and Alexander slipped away quietly, leaving behind a trail of sparklers lit by their loved ones. They climbed aboard a waiting limousine, ready to begin their honeymoon adventure. Their destination was a surprise planned by Alexander, a secluded island retreat where they could relax and reflect on the incredible journey that had brought them here. As the car pulled away, Sarah leaned her head against Alexander's shoulder, exhaustion and elation washing over her. "We did it," she murmured, still unable to fully process the magnitude of the day. "We did," Alexander agreed, kissing the top of her head. "And this is just the beginning." In that moment, surrounded by darkness but illuminated by the promise of their future, Sarah knew he was right. Together they had overcome obstacles, bridged gaps, and created something extraordinary. Their love story wasn't just about a mechanic fixing a billionaire's jet. It was about two people finding each other against all odds and choosing to build a life rooted in trust, respect, and unwavering devotion. As the limousine sped toward the airport, Sarah closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the road lull her into a peaceful state. No matter what challenges lay ahead, She knew they would face them together, as equals, as partners, and as soulmates. And in that certainty, she found her greatest happiness.